Hello, YouTubers, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. This is the second episode this morning out of 3 episodes I'm going to be bringing you. This one has 4 articles in it, and the URLs are in the description of the video, so you can pull them up and take a look at whatever information in them that you need for your research. The first one here is off of Natural News, and it says Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, MSNBC incited kidnapping, torture, and scalping of white special needs boy in disgusting racial hate crime. Journo terrorism, now a clear and present danger to America. By now, you've no doubt heard about the 4 black teens in Chicago who kidnapped, bound, tortured, scalped, and beat a young white special needs boy on Facebook Live video feed, all the while shouting anti-Trump and racist hate slogans that will turn your stomach. Graphic footage captured on Facebook Live shows a mentally handicapped white man being tortured in Chicago by African-American assailants as they laugh and express their disgust for white people and President-elect Donald Trump, reports the Daily Caller. The video, taken by a woman identified on Facebook as Brittany Herring, shows a man tied up with tape across his mouth. The victim is shown being repeatedly hit, sliced at with a knife, and berated, and his clothes ripped off. If you've ever wondered whether violent black hoodlums are targeting white people for extreme violence, hatred, felony assault, this sickening, racially motivated violence broadcast live by Facebook just confirmed it once and for all. In fact, black on white crime is now far more prevalent, violent, and hate-oriented than white on black crime across America, as the following status reveal. African Americans are only 13% of the population, but commit over 50% of the murders. Statistics on who's really committing violent crime prove this beyond any debate. Today, blacks are about 13% of the population and continue to be responsible for an inordinate amount of crime. Between 1976 and 2005, blacks committed more than half of all murders in the United States, reports the Washington Times. The black arrest rate for most offenses, including robbery, aggravated assault, and property crimes, is still typically 2 to 3 times their representation in the population. Blacks as a group are also overrepresented among persons arrested for so-called white-collar crimes such as counterfeiting, fraud, and embezzlement. And blaming this decades-long, well-documented trend on racist cops, prosecutors, judges, sentencing guidelines, and drug laws does not cut it as a plausible explanation. The 4 hoodlums responsible for this particular violent hate crime against an innocent special needs teen have now been arrested and charged with multiple serious crimes. They are Jordan Hill, 18, of Carpentersville, Tesfaye Cooper, 18, of Chicago, Brittany Covington, 18, of Chicago, and Tanisha Covington, 24, of Chicago. According to Zero Hedge, they have been charged with aggravated kidnapping, hate crime, aggravated unlawful restraint, aggravated battery with deadly weapon, and residential burglary, according to the Cook County State's attorney. Hill was also charged with robbery and possession of a stolen motor vehicle. Here's what they look like in this article. There's a picture. It says, I think if Obama had a son, one of them might look just like the thug on the right. So, let's see, it says from the Daily Caller, at one point in the video, the primary assailant shouts at the bound man, F. Donald Trump, nigga, F white people boy, F white people boy, while he kicks him. At another point in the video, the perpetrators laugh about being reported to the police in response to a Facebook commenter claiming they're going to be arrested. Here's sickening video of the outrageous crime against whites, and it is very graphic. So if you pull that up, be aware. It says left-wing media all but blacklisted the gruesome story, hoping no one learns the truth about black on white hate crime in America. Not surprisingly, this lynching of a white special needs boy is being almost completely censored by the entire left-wing media that incited it. The dishonest fake stream media only reports news that fits their false narratives. Thus, If 4 white teens had bound, beaten, and kidnapped a young black boy, it would be headlines everywhere, alongside nationwide riots in every major city. Call this disgusting attack on Obama's backyard exactly what it is: Trump-hating race crime against defenseless white men by young black Americans who shame their country. Journalist and globalist Piers Morgan in this UK Daily Mail article says, "Today I'm in shock. I just watched a video that didn't just sicken me, it contaminated every pore of my soul with feelings of pure, unadulterated, raw disgust and hatred. The short piece of film I endured depicts a gang of 4 black teenage thugs, 2 male, 2 female, abusing and torturing a poor, terrified young white man with special needs. The sheer scale of their depravity appears to know no bounds. These smirking scumbags tie him up, gag him, kick him, punch him, scalp him by viciously slashing his hair with a knife, and flick burning cigarette ashes on the head wounds they inflict in the process. They laugh, they jeer. One of them shouts, 'F Donald Trump,' 'F white people.' Another urges the victim to say, 'I love black people,' and then they force him at knife point to say, 'F Donald Trump.' This is not a quick, spontaneous assault. The victim is believed to have been held for up to 48 hours. The DOJ stats, black thugs are real violent crime problem in America, and they tend to. When black people are attacked by white people, that's headline news everywhere. But when a white boy is tortured, kidnapped, scalped, and beaten by black thugs, it's not news to the left-wing media. That's how the media pretend black people commit almost no crimes at all, when in truth, they're the ones carrying out the vast majority of violent crimes across America, according to the U.S. Justice Department statistics. Black crime and incarceration rates spiked in the 1970s and 80s in cities such as Baltimore, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Washington under black mayors and black police chiefs. Some of the most violent cities in the United States today are run by blacks, writes Jeffrey Riley, a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Black people are not shooting each other at these alarming rates in Chicago and other urban areas because our gun laws or our drug laws or criminal justice system that has it in for them. The problem is primarily cultural. Self-destructive behaviors and attitudes are all too common among the black underclass. Criminal behavior, which is one manifestation of black pathology that ultimately stems from the breakdown of the black family. It's also worth noting that the very same violent black thugs who kidnapped this innocent white teen are exactly the same people who, once they reach voting age, vote Democrat like Obama and Clinton. Statistically speaking, African American convicted felons vote overwhelmingly for Democrats in elections, and that's exactly why Democrats keep pushing to grant voting rights to felons and illegal aliens too, but that's another story. The violent tendencies of black inner city thugs isn't even a real story in all this, by the way. The real story is that the left-wing media incited this violence with its rising hate rhetoric against Trump supporters and white people in general. Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC are complicit in this violent kidnapping, torture, and beating of an innocent white teen. That's right. The Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, and other propagandists of the fake stream media incited this violence against an innocent special needs boy. They are the ones who spread the hate, gin up the racialism, and fan the flames of violence against Trump supporters. For the last 2 years, the hate-filled left-wing media has spewed racial hatred and anti-Trump propaganda that encouraged and normalizes violent acts against white people and Trump supporters. This campaign has been deliberately planned, scripted, and carried out by the same prominent members of the fraudulent fake stream media that also pushed the false Russian hacking story, the false power grid penetration story, and the false prop or not Russian influence story. We have now reached the point in America where the left-wing media is deliberately engaged in journo-terrorism. A few weeks back in the story entitled Journo-Terrorism, the goal of the left-wing media has always been to terrorize voters and hypnotically control them using orchestrated fear programming of psychological terrorism and cultural supervision, or I'm sorry, of cultural subversion has come to fruition in this felony kidnapping incident in Chicago. This is the kind of violence and hatred the left-wing media wants people to display towards Trump supporters. If this were a white gang kidnapping and torturing of a black victim, it would be top-ranking news story everywhere for days on end. Not surprisingly, the delusional left wing has gone to great lengths to try to claim this isn't a hate crime, and it wasn't even evil. To leftists, the violent black thugs who kidnapped and scalped this innocent boy were just knuckleheads who made a mistake. By the same twisted logic, they would probably describe black rapists as uninvited lovers. If 4 white men kidnapped, tied up, and tortured a black mentally disabled man, all captured on a live Facebook video, heard making statements like F Obama and F blacks, would any reader hesitate to call them out for being racist? Ask All News Pipeline, an independent media website, AMP also reports the mainstream media, progressive liberals, Democrats, Barack Obama, college professors, millennials, Black Lives Matter activists, and social justice warriors are constantly bemoaning racism against blacks and by whites. But when 4 black thugs in Chicago kidnap a special needs white male, tie him up, and brutally torture him live on Facebook, making statements like F whites and F Trump, the MSM is whitewashing the hate crime and racism aspect. Liberal bloggers aren't even bothering to address it. Barack Obama hasn't come out and claimed these 4 black thugs could have been me. If this had been done to an African American by 4 whites, every liberal in the country would be outraged, and there would be no question it is a hate crime, said Newt Gingrich on Fox and Friends, as reported by Breitbart.com. So let's be clear about this. We are right on the edge of a terrible period, which I know President-elect Donald Trump wants to avoid, of having the deep, bitter division in communities that makes America hard to govern. Gingrich is correct. If this had been a white on black crime, practically the entire country would have erupted into outrage, complete with massive riots in at least a dozen U.S. cities, combined with calls to stop white hatred and demand that law enforcement seek justice for the victim. But when the victim is white, the left-wing media mostly censors the story and pretends it never happened. White people are never supposed to be outraged when violent black gangbangers and thugs kidnap, torture, and violently beat them for simple reason that, according to the insane, mentally ill left-wing media, white people deserve to be beaten. Being white is, as far as they're concerned, practically an admission that you're an evil, racist bigot. And if you're a Trump supporter, you deserve a good beatdown, right? That's the insanity of the left-wing media. Hate crimes don't count if they are committed by black people, and whites are evil even when they're victims. These thugs didn't come up with the kidnapping idea in a vacuum. Does anyone really think these black thugs came up with the kidnapping and torture idea in a vacuum? No. The idea of false narratives that led to sickening act of hatred and violence have been propagated in the mainstream media for the past several years. The thugs in Chicago are merely acting out the hatred that's been instilled in their minds by CNN and other left-wing media terror journalists who work at places like the Washington Post, the new Prava of left-wing false narrative propagandists. Planned by the left, they actively seek to cause violence, mayhem, race wars, and violence against whites by ginning up extreme hatred through false flag hate crime hoaxes, false news narratives, and malicious censorship of the truth about violence and hatred on the left. This has all been Obama's plan from the start. By the way, divide America, whip up racial hatred, then claim all the thugs are victims while condemning law enforcement for trying to keep the peace. The twisted, mentally ill overlay of all this is that while pushing racial hatred and violence, the left proclaim itself to have a monopoly on compassion and tolerance. The real tolerance of the left is best demonstrated in the sickening kidnapping and torture video of an innocent special needs white teen. This is the real tolerance of the left on full display. If you don't agree with their mentally ill social justice agendas, then they'll beat you, torture you, verbally assault you, and even scalp you in front of the whole world in a live video broadcast. Somehow, all the self-proclaimed social justice warriors who carry out such acts don't see anything wrong with violent assaults on white people, while literally they have no concept that violently assaulting an innocent citizen is wrong. Welcome to Obama's America. 8 years into the nightmare that sleeper cell Obama has definitely unleashed on the nation in a bid to destroy this country. There's kidnapping, torture, and race-based hate crime isn't evil or racist. The mentally ill disconnected from reality in all this, best demonstrated by CNN's journo terrorist Don Lemon. After watching the kidnapping, torture, and race-motivated felony violence against a white teen, Lemon declared the act was not evil or racist. To CNN, their entire crew of mentally ill journo terrorists, black people cannot by definition commit hate crimes, since hate is only something that originates with white people. That's how sick, demented, and truly psychopathic or sociopathic CNN and the entire left-wing media has become. These people are beyond delusional. They are a danger to society and desperately need to be carted away for psychiatric evaluation. Watch CNN's Don Lemon demonstrate his extreme mental illness in a video that is in this article, if you care to watch it. Dear President Trump, it is time to arrest the journo terrorists and stop inciting of racial violence across America. Join me in the call for President Trump to arrest, prosecute, and imprison the journo terrorists who are deliberately working to incite violence as part of their malicious plot to destroy America, subvert American culture, and obliterate Christians and white people across the board. This is way beyond free speech issue, by the way. They are engaged in war. The First Amendment does not protect someone's right to deliberately engage in premeditated psychological terrorism on a massive scale with the intended purpose of inciting violence and overthrowing a nation. That's so far beyond yelling fire in a crowded room that they aren't even comparable. When the Washington Post fabricates fake news about Russian hacking the election, that's journo terrorism. When CNN incites hatred toward Trump supporters, being repeatedly lying and slandering Trump with endless stream of hatred invoking smears, that's journo terrorism. When the New York Times repeatedly and falsely claims Trump supporters are KKK supporters, racists, sexists, xenophobes, that's journo terrorism. The journo terrorists are deliberately trying to rip America apart to protect our citizens, our society, and our sanity. They must be stopped. Remember, too, that the left has always blamed conservative talk radio show for hate, or for every hate crime or shooting carried out by any white person. Rush Limbaugh is usually targeted, and he was blamed for the Timothy McVeigh, Oklahoma City attack in 1994, among other events. The political left has always said that the right-wing radio hosts or websites incited such violence. Will those same people now apply their own logic and proclaim the left-wing media has incited this latest black-on-white hate crime in Chicago? Of course they won't. Join me in calling to President Trump to arrest the journo terrorists and charge them with subversion, inciting violence, and conspiring to overthrow the government. We can no longer stand by and watch these evil, malicious Washington Post, CNN, and New York Times criminals tear our country apart while innocent white people are lynched on live Facebook streams. We either start defending this nation or we lose it, period. It's time we stood up for America and arrest those who are deliberately trying to destroy it. Next article I have for you is off of WND.com, and it says, Enemies Within. Hillary's links to Muslim Brotherhood revealed. A blockbuster new documentary asserts there is master plan to create a permanent liberal majority in America by flooding it with millions of voters hostile to conservatism. But the Enemies Within also claims forces dedicated to the destruction of this country have even penetrated the national security bureaucracy, endangering Americans and the entire system of constitutional government. Key to this case is the testimony of Philip Haney, a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security and a counterterrorism analyst who was widely praised and commended by his superiors throughout his distinguished career. By accumulating vast amounts of data and examining the relationships between various extremist groups and their sources of funding, Haney has identified dozens of terrorists throughout the years, arguably preventing numerous attacks. However, in 2009, it was Haney himself who was targeted by his own government. He tells his story in the book See Something, Say Nothing, but his story is also the most powerful part of The Enemies Within. He recounts the enemies within. I finished a case up, but try that again. I finished the case up. I put in the system. There were 67 records related to the case, individuals and organizations. But then about 2 weeks after I put the case into the system, I went on vacation and received a call from my colleague. He said they had removed the records from the system. They didn't just modify them, they completely obliterated them, took all of them out. Haney argues this dramatic action had devastating consequences for the American people. The specific records the government deleted turned out to be directly relevant to terrorist attacks that took place later. Those are the records related to the network of Mosque and organizations operating in the United States that is linked to the San Bernardino shooting and the Orlando shooting, he recalled. Indeed, Haney states that the video federal government not only removed the records, but actually investigated him for simply doing his job. They said essentially that I did not have the authority to put those records into the system, even though I had been commended by the National Targeting Center for finding 300 terrorists, Haney says in the film. So essentially, the last 3 years of my career, I was under investigation by 3 different government agencies, all at the same time. They essentially determined that I was more of a threat than these terrorist groups. Shockingly, the distinguished counterterrorism expert says no one in the federal government ever claimed his records were inaccurate or untrue. The facts, he claims, were beyond dispute. Instead, for no good reason, he can identify his work was eliminated and he was disgraced. In one of the most dramatic moments of the film, Haney describes his reaction as feeling infuriated and stripped naked. He describes the painful experience as public humiliation. To sequester me in a small room for the last 11 months of my career with no assigned duties, and then have the audacity to say those were not adverse actions because we're just conducting an investigation, Haney remembers. It's cruel to do that to a person. It wasn't moral infraction. It wasn't refusal to obey orders. It wasn't some crime that I'd committed. It was simply doing the job that I took a vow to do and had been recognized and awarded for. For that reason, Haney emphatically states in the documentary, the United States has enemies within its own government. Distinguished author and researcher Trevor Loudon describes the terrifying full extent of his hostile network operating within America's own borders in The Enemies Within, detailing an alliance between radical Marxist and Islamic extremists that has penetrated the very highest levels of the federal government. As Haney explains in the film, the problem has gotten so bad many of America's politicians and policymakers would not be able to pass the kind of basic security checks required of even entry-level employees. If you have overt ties to associations with known associations with terrorism, you cannot pass a background check, Haney says in the film. He describes Hillary Clinton as a domestic threat and details the deep connections between the former Democratic presidential nominee and Secretary of State with some of the most dangerous Islamic movements in the world. They even go beyond her close relationship with longtime aide and confidant Huma Abedin. The most dangerous enemy is the one who operates from within your own gates. Discover the traitors within your own country and help spread the word about how America is already under attack. Don't miss the enemies within, available now in the WND Superstore. Hillary Clinton's ties are a lot deeper, broader, and wider than Huma Abedin, Haney says. The best example of her ties is the affiliation with the Istanbul process, and in particular with UN Resolution 1618. That resolution, it essentially criminalizes defamation of Islam, has been backed for 10 years by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, a 57-nation organization. It is essentially run in its leadership positions by members of the Muslim Brotherhood. By endorsing UN Resolution 16/18, by default, Hillary Clinton is aiding and abetting the Muslim Brotherhood on a macro global level. And the Muslim Brotherhood, in Haney's opinion, is national security professional, is directly responsible for sponsoring terrorism. He argues in The Enemies Within, the organization should be labeled a terrorist group and shut down. Since we already know that the Muslim Brotherhood is the parent and that these organizations are overtly supporting Hamas and other like-minded organizations around the world, then we should shut those organizations, he declared in the film, and that would send a shockwave throughout the pro-Sharia, pro-jihadist Islamic world without firing a single shot or dropping a bomb anywhere in the world. Until that happens, Haney argues, national security professionals have been completely blindfolded and handcuffed. We can't use the most basic fundamental language that they themselves use to help us understand what Islam believes and what its intentions are, he explains in the movie. The Enemies Within doesn't just analyze radical Islam. Instead, it details the terrifying extent to which the left radicals who have overtly declared their anti-American intentions are taking control of the very institutions meant to protect Americans. At a time when the mainstream media is suddenly concerned about supposed Russian interference, The Enemies Within shows the rot set in much sooner than the last election cycle and involves hostile foreign actors more malevolent than Vladimir Putin. Those of us who took our oath seriously are being betrayed, Haney says of his fellow national security professionals in the film. Things like that, which happened to me, will happen more and more often because people will be forced to stand up for the law and risk of their career and maybe even their life. At the time of the crisis, remaining uninformed just isn't dangerous, it's deadly. The Enemies Within is the first step to recognizing where the threat is coming from. And there's video in this if you care to take a look at the video. Says the most dangerous enemy is the one who operates from within your own gates. Discover the traitors within our own country and help spread the word about how America is already under attack. Don't miss the Enemies Within, available now in the WND Superstore. So there's a link there that you can get that if you want to take a look at it. The next article I have is off of BizPac Review, and it says, after a 4-year battle, New Jersey judge okays the building of mosque in landmark decision. In what was hailed as a landmark decision, a federal judge said a New Jersey town broke federal anti-discrimination laws by refusing to allow a group of Muslims to build a new mosque. The planning board of Bernards Township, New Jersey, a town just west of Newark, has denied plans for the building by insisting that the proposed property didn't have enough parking. But the Muslim congregants felt the reason for denying the building permit was just an excuse to quash their religious freedom because the city was demanding they have more parking space than the town had ever demanded of Christians or Jewish places of worship. So the Muslim group took the city to federal court claiming discrimination. After a 4-year effort to get the mosque approved, the Muslims sued the town in federal court in March of 2016. During the case, the city argued that the parking requirements had nothing to do with religion and was meant a safety issue only. But counsel for the Muslim group Deal Magny, said that the unfair parking requirements have been used against new Mosque before, and it's just a tactic that had nothing to do with safety. Now the city's lost their case. This month, the U.S. District Judge Michael Shipp ruled that the city's parking requirements amounted to a violation of the Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act, the Daily Caller reported. The judge ruled that to allow the town to use parking as a weapon against religious groups gave the town unbridled and unconstitutional direction. Lawyer Magny said of the decision, "This truly is a landmark ruling with national impact." And the final article I have in this episode is off of Federalist.com, and it says, Federal Court, Wisconsin has too many Republicans. I can't make this stuff up. If a court can rule the Wisconsin state legislature does not have enough Democrats, it takes voting power away from citizenry. A federal district court is attempting to nullify the results of the last 4 elections in Wisconsin by declaring that the state legislature does not have enough Democrats. Political gerrymandering by the Republican-controlled state legislature, the court has concluded, has caused such an unfair result in favor of Republicans in the state legislature as to constitute a violation of the Equal Protection Clause, a conclusion that the Supreme Court has never reached. In Article 1, Section 4's language about the place or the time, place, and manner of holding elections for the federal House and Senate, the Constitution provides that state legislatures shall draw up voting districts for elections to the U.S. House. The Constitution says nothing about drawing up of legislative districts for state offices. That was considered a state political prerogative under the federalism unless the Supreme Court repealed its own precedents and drastically altered the political question doctrine in its reapportionment and redistricting decisions in Baker versus Carr of 1962. Westbury versus Sanders, 1964, and Reynolds versus Sims in 1964, with the passage of the Voting Right Act in 1965, the Supreme Court's supervision of both federal and state reapportionment became comprehensive. How to decide a political gerrymandering case? Since the mid-1960s, almost all of the Supreme Court's decisions in this area concern violations of the one man, one vote principle and or allegations of racial gerrymandering. There have been only 2 cases of significance regarding the different principle of political gerrymandering, that is, drawing up of legislative districts by the party in control of the legislative to favor its own candidates. In Davis versus Vandermeer in 1986, the court, in a plurality opinion addressing the claims by Democrats against the makeup of Indiana legislature, held for the first time that claims of political gerrymandering could be adjudicated, but the court also held that the apportionment scheme drawn up by the Republican legislature in Indiana had an insufficiently adverse effect on Democrats to constitute a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. While recognizing the delicacy of intruding on this most political of legislative function, the court concluded that the case of discriminatory vote dilution by a political party was possible. But in Bath versus Jubiler in 2004, the court addressed the possible standard of proof a court could use and rejected a suit by Democrats that the 2001 reapportionment by Pennsylvania legislature had violated their rights under the Equal Protection Clause. In the plurality decision for the court, 4 judges concluded that 18 years of essentially pointless litigation have persuaded us that Vandermeer is incapable of principled application. We would therefore overrule that case and decline to adjudicate these political gerrymandering claims. Justice Kennedy, who was not on the court for the Davis decision, voted with the plurality on the facts of the Pennsylvania case, but refused to join the plurality in overruling Vandermeer. As for how to decide a political gerrymandering case, the court observed that the fact that the 4 dissenters in the case could come up with 3 different standards, all of them different from the 2 proposed in Vandermeer, and the one proposed here by appellants, go a long way to establishing that there is no constitutionality discernible standard. Republican efficiency gap. In a 116-page, 416-footnote opinion, the Federal District Court in Wisconsin thinks that it has discovered such a standard. The court compares the number of state legislative seats won by each party to the total statewide popular vote for those seats. Thus, the court says in 2012, Republican voters garnered 48.6% of the statewide vote, but secured 60 seats in the assembly, the state house. In 2014, Republicans increased their vote percentage to 52 and secured 63 assembly seats. The court concluded that the districting plan drawn up by the Republican-controlled legislature had created a voter efficiency gap and had caused the Democrats to have wasted votes in districts that they won too handily. The court held the Democrats could have used those votes to be more competitive in other districts, and the court was precise in stating that the harm caused, there was a pro-Republican efficiency gap of 13 statehouse seats in 2012 and 10 statehouse seats in 2014. Almost no significance to the fact that the Republicans won control of state legislature in 2010 elections, not the 2012 or 2014 elections under a redistricting plan put into effect by the court itself. As legal support, the Wisconsin court really had only the opening left by Justice Kennedy in refusing to overrule Vandermeer. Nevertheless, the court went on a scavenger hunt through Vandermeer, Vife, and other Supreme Court decisions to find passages in plurality, concurring, and dissenting opinions to support its determination to create new constitutional law. 3 of the most important cases that the court relied on as legal sources concerned racial, not political gerrymandering. With big data, will courts control representation? The court has therefore required both the Democratic plaintiffs and the state of Wisconsin to come up with new redistricting plans, but it's more than obvious that the court has already done that work, including the precise calculations cited above for the Democratic plaintiffs. And what can the state of Wisconsin do to counter that? It appears that it can do nothing. The court acknowledges that Wisconsin's redistricting plan was based on traditional districting principles of compactness, continuity, and respect for political subversion, or and respect for political subdivisions. And the case involved no allegations whatsoever of racial gerrymandering. In other words, Wisconsin blamelessly configured its voting districts, but was blamed anyway for failing a duty that it did not know existed. In this area of big data, in which every precinct in every state has statistics on the exact number of registered Democrats and Republicans, it seems that the results is a foregone conclusion: efficiency gap, proportional representation. In measuring statewide wasted votes for state legislative offices, the efficiency gap does not take into account that voters do not vote statewide. They vote for individual candidates in individual districts, nor do they necessarily vote by party. In presidential elections, for instance, candidate Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump have all been candidates who attracted crossover voters. As for statewide voting for governor, in what the court thinks is Democratic Wisconsin, Republican Scott Walker has won that vote 3 times in this decade. In district-based elections that they win overwhelmingly, the Republicans have wasted votes as well. And should not the large number of independent voters be figured into the calculations? The efficiency gap and wasted votes calculation may sound rather simple, but they are in fact based on sophisticated statistical interpretations by experts involving software models, regression analysis, and S-curves. That is unlike the act of voting. They are removed from comprehension of the vast majority of citizens. So The new model of elections will be decided by these new means. Thus, voting, the first act of citizenship, will be regulated by courts and experts they give credence to. So there you have the second episode out of the trifecta I'm going to give you this morning. If you like what we're doing, give it a thumbs up, share it so that everybody on your social media gets to enjoy the news, and be sure and subscribe. Click that little bell beside the subscribe button and check that box. You'll get email alerts every time I put out a show, and we'll see you in the next episode.